Hey, welcome to the Citizen Mike Show. Thanks for tuning in. Somewhere on that split screen, let's get that split screen up, is Jason Zandri, Democratic Town Councilor on the Wallingford Town Council. Jason, this is going to be your last term, at least for a while, maybe forever, I don't know. That's the first thing I want to ask you. You weren't on the ballot this time for complicated reasons well beyond the scope of this episode, but will be on the ballot again. Will you run again?
Well, thanks first, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show. I always appreciate the opportunity to come on in and have some intelligent discussion with you and for all the viewers out there. So, I guess I have to answer your question the same way I answer questions in my technology classes and start off with, well, it depends. It really depends upon where I am personally about a year from now. I mean, obviously, you don't kick off a campaign 4 weeks before, the election day. So wherever I'm at in my life at that point, I'll have to take an assessment of where I feel like I belong in the scope of things, number one. And number two, I'm going to have to take a reading or temperature reading, if you will, of the Democrat Town Committee, because I had my issues this past year, like you said, well beyond the scope of this session. And if things don't change, then I'm still under the same set of conditions of why I didn't run this particular time.
Let's talk about the election and your view of it. But I want to introduce it this way. Of course, we had Alita Sella on, we had Riley O'Connell on, Chris Shortell and I have discussed it. It appears that the Democratic slate and their supporters, the candidate committee, the Democratic Town Committee, although they didn't win anything, they, to be frank, lost every seat that they could have, believe that they've made progress in that. Sure, the group, the slate, may not have won, but they got closer to the winners and closed the gap. And of course, Riley O'Connell came extraordinarily close. Just maybe 200 votes. If they had flipped the other way, he'd be mayor. But the Democratic Town Committee finds encouragement in this, feel that they're on the right track. And if they keep doing what they're doing, maybe with a little tweaks here and there, they can win some seats. Your assessment of that assessment?
Well, I think, in my opinion, the assessment is misleading. Here you have a mayoral candidate who worked his bones dry over this campaign. He basically remained unemployed to do campaigning 100% of the time. And the Democrat Town Committee basically divorced themselves from his campaign about a month or two before the election. In no uncertain terms, they told him to go spin. He worked, and his committee worked alongside the other candidates that ran, but not with the Democrat Town Committee. There was a big falling out. Now, whether they wanted to admit that publicly or not, that's up to them. I didn't hear any of that, but in the press or on your show, but they stopped talking to each other, period. There was an in-between that went between Alita Sella and Riley O'Connell. They stopped talking to one another. So to me, that was a big issue. Another issue is, again, we'll take a look at how well Riley did in his own campaign, with his own committee and his own hard work. And then you have other people that ran for other offices that were as equally qualified. I'm going to pick on Maureen Reed in a positive light. She was somebody that should have been able to make it on her credentials. She needed exposure. She's new to the scene, but given her ability to be a Board of Education member is strong. And this committee that should have been working harder to get someone like that elected missed. So to call the election a success, that's not the word that I would use. When you lose a seat on the Board of Ed like that, it's a failure, not a gain. And when you lose the seat to someone that's got 25 years experience, you couldn't get that person elected, you have to look internally and assess what went wrong.
Yeah, some context. The Republicans had 4 incumbents not run again. There are 4 open seats from the Republican ticket on the Board of Ed, and the Democrats couldn't grab any of them. And they ended up with a minimum 3 on the Board of Ed, all incumbents. So what was different this year was the slate concept that the council candidates and the Board of Ed candidates used. The slate concept is a little bit ill-defined, but is basically a group running as a group. Money is pooled. I'm not sure how decisions are made about campaign strategy, but maybe as members of the public, you and I, we've seen enough of it to make an assessment of the slate process. Your view, running as a slate, running as an individual.
Well, so again, I think the biggest issue is underestimating the collective will of the electorate. I have always said we all serve at the leisure of the electorate, and no one is above that collective will. And to assume that people are just voting down, hey, I'm a Republican, I'm going to vote just Republican, or I'm a Democrat and I'm going to just vote Democrat is wrong. As a matter of fact, there's an argument for, with the Republicans being in power the way they are, they're going to choose their majority, and then they're going to help choose the minority. If there are other people running for town council and other people running for Board of Education that are more likely to side with their people, they're going to say, I might throw one of my votes over to Jane Smith or Mark Jones because they're middle of the road and they're a little conservative and they don't lean quite as far to the left. So they'll pick people that are more amenable to their side. So this whole concept of a line strategy, it is awesome that anybody that runs for office, especially the incumbents, help the new people. But to assume that you're not all trying, it's like musical chairs. 12 people walk in a circle, there are 9 seats. As much as you might want to not trip the person behind you or step on the heel of the person in front of you, you want to sit down when the music stops.
Yeah, the data, does show that the Democrats as a group got closer to the Republicans as a group, or let me just rephrase that a little bit. The Republicans didn't run away with it this year as much as they have in past years. Now, the question is that a correlation to Riley O'Connell's campaign, or to the extent that the Democrats closed that gap, and the data, irrefutably says that Republicans didn't run away with it as much? Is that because of Riley O'Connell's coattails, or do we just not know? Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think there's a couple of ways to look at that. I definitely believe Riley O'Connell's campaign brought more people in. There were 2,000 more voters that showed up this year over 2019. So without a doubt, more people came out to vote. And if they were Riley supporters and they supported the Democrats, then yes, that's where that gap closes up. I still believe that for spending the amount of money that the DTC spent, to have an organized campaign moderator that was going to go out and do all this work that normally volunteers used to do, we got the same results. As a Democrat, when you look at people that used to manage the campaigns by volunteer basis, and this year they spent $7,500 paying somebody, and we got no different result. As a matter of fact, the DTC war chest is $1,000 in the hole that had to be made whole from somebody's campaign with a donation. Raises the question again, how well did we all do?
Yeah, the Democratic Town Committee spent a huge amount of money on rent, to pay the campaign manager. I think you used the word moderator, campaign
manager, yeah,
and consultants. And I guess those choices may be reviewed. I don't know. It would be very amazing. It'd be an amazing accomplishment if 2 years from now they could raise the same amount of money. It may be a one-off, it may not be, but we'll see. Final reflections on the campaign before we move over to the next topic. If they did this again, would they do as well, or would they did worse? The slate concept.
I guess it really depends on the slate itself. I think it's very difficult for brand new people coming on board, whatever walk of life they might come to. Again, I'm going to default to Maureen Reed. with 25 years experience, she should have been a shoo-in to take Patricia's spot. Patty didn't run, should have been able to slide right in, on top of the fact that there were 4 non-incumbent seats to grab, and we couldn't grab one. So I think it really depends on the mood of the electorate, and really the again, what candidates come forward, who's in the pipeline, who's going to step up next.
Yeah. While I make my next final comments, I want to put up the final tallies of the council results. They've shifted a little bit. For a long time, the Secretary of State didn't have the right numbers because absentee ballots weren't loaded in. I didn't see a problem at our own town hall. It was a matter of communicating what the town hall had with the Secretary of State's office, and that caused some confusion. So what you're seeing now is that JPEG up there with the final results. If not discussing tonight or on this episode the Board of Ed results. Let's move over to what happened Tuesday night at the council meeting. There was an issue in front of the council as to whether or not the Board of Ed should be able to get and keep the amount of its surplus and add it to their so-called 2% account. Jason, let's talk quickly what that 2% account is, why it's there, and in your view, what the purpose is.
Sure. So, I mean, first off, I want to let the viewers understand this used to be called a 1% account, and they changed it to a 2% account because of the amount of money that was to be able to be brought into it. And this is not a 2% account in totality. In other words, like the total amount in the account. There could be 2% going into this account every single year. So, it's a smart move to do when I mean, right now, like if you take Public Works, for example, and they have $50,000 left over, they don't get to keep it. It rolls back into the general fund. This is why the general fund, the rainy day balance on the town side, has $27 million in it. The fund that the Board of Education has it's kept within the Board of Education. It's money that they get to roll over that doesn't get used. If they budgeted $100,000 for something and they only spend $70,000 of it, they're able to pile this cash up and then ask the town to come, can we roll it into this 2% fund? Because otherwise we're going to buy 10,000 reams of paper and 10,000 pounds of paper clips to use it up so you don't take it away from us.
Yeah. So I want to go back into the history a bit. This 2% account started as a 1% account is a fairly recent development. I think it started in 2014. The legislature was made aware of some practices by boards of education across the state, which were not very good. And the boards of education around the state realized that if they didn't spend all of their money that was in their budget, they would lose what they don't use. And the money would go back to the town and the general fund. So a bill was passed in 2014 that said, in the discretion of the town council, boards of ed across the state, to the extent they have unspent money at the end of the year, can keep that money in a reserve fund, in a rainy day fund. And the idea was, or the thought was, because boards of ed across the state were pre-buying supplies they didn't really need at the time just to exhaust their money, or they were buying at a time that wasn't quite right. Maybe prices were high, maybe they weren't ready for it, but there's pressure to exhaust their money and spend it unwisely. The legislator, to try to mitigate this, passed the 1% fund that was later increased to 2% of that current year's existing budget. That's sort of the general background. So you were confronted or faced Tuesday night with this issue. The Board of Ed, and let me refer to my notes because I don't memorize this, had a surplus of 1.3 million left over unspent. What they wanted to keep They wanted a transfer out of the general fund into their 2% fund of about $970,000. That's what I'm
Correct.
asking you to do.
Correct.
As a counselor, what are the criteria for doing that? Because in past years you voted for it, but this year you voted against it. So there's a test of some, in your mind as to when and under what circumstances they get the money.
So this is the way that I looked at it. So first, I kind of want to set one more tone with everybody, make sure everybody understands, because like you mentioned, one of the things was they would pre-buy or buy supplies and so on and so forth. Board of Education budgets can never be cut. If they get $110,000 or $110 million this year, that's the least amount that they can get next year. So they would consume up their budgets like that because they didn't want to be held. Well, you only spent 107 last year, 107 million, and you pre-purchased a bunch of stuff. So we're just going to give you the $110 million again. So that's the first thing that I kind of want to make sure that the listeners understand, the viewers at home. We can never cut their budget. The most we can do is keep it exactly the same as the year before. So that's the first thing. So you're right. In years past, I did support this because the fund was smaller. The fund itself in totality was smaller, and the amounts being transferred were smaller. You had sent along, and I didn't have the numbers, so I appreciate you sent it along to me. You sent a list of what these fund balances were. And in years past when I voted, I had those in front of me when I did. And I had the numbers in front of me that night when I voted. The problem is the money's going in, some of it is being spent, and it's building up a surplus, exactly like our government side rainy day fund. We've got $7 million that we take out, we put it in the budget, we spend some of it sometimes, other times we don't, we move it all back, and then we put more on top of it. This balance has grown from $50,000 in 2015 to when we had the numbers in front of us at the council meeting, $2,683,000. And they wanted to add 969, almost $1 million more on top of it. If we had done that, they would have had $3,650,000 if we had approved it. And we started to ask, what are they going to use it for? And they had a bunch of things earmarked for that 969. The problem is they've got $2,683,000 to use it right now. Some of the concerns that came up with, they had some concerns about COVID funds, if they had to do a lot of cleaning, if they had to do this, that, and the other thing. They've got money from the state that came in from the federal government. If there was more money, they could always come to the town. So these are the different things that I was weighing. And this year, trying to clear $3 million again caused me some concern, because when this is in their rainy day fund, the municipal side can't use it. So the past 2 years, we've pushed more money in from the rainy day fund, plus some cuts. The council has done this to keep the taxes flat. And this is less money that we can leverage.
So I prepared about an 8-minute collage of the debate on Tuesday night, which I hope captures the various perspectives, points of view, and the underlying facts upon which the council ultimately made their vote. The roll call vote is at the very end of the tape. Folks, keep score. We'll review the vote at the end of it. And Jason and I will talk about our views on some of the arguments. Let's roll that little video. 3, 2, 1.
We're here to request a transfer into the 2% account of $969,336. At the end of the last fiscal year, we had a surplus of $1,342,402, and we are requesting of that $969,336 be transferred into the 2% fund for us to do certain non-recurring type projects and different purchases.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening. There's about $3 million in that account now, right?
My calculation is there's 2.683 million currently in that account.
Yeah, which is
Okay, so I'd,
about $3 million, right?
well, say,
Okay.
yeah.
So I guess it begs the question, you've got earmarked projects, you've had money to do those projects. Why didn't you utilize the money that's in the account to do those projects that now you're projecting to take this money to expend?
So we have, I'll break down that 2.683 or 3 million. We have about 435,000 in projects that are in process or, need to be bid, or one we can't do till the summer. And then we also had set aside 647,000 for special ed that we set aside probably 5 years ago. That's in that balance. And then, as you folks know, we came last year when we had our initial projections were a very large deficit. We set aside 1.6 million, to be exact, 1.6 million, $853 that we had set that aside for COVID-related expenses. And, our hope is to leave those, as set-asides currently, and to, continue with doing the projects we have scheduled, and then additionally continue 969,000 of additional projects. Some of them are related to projects that are ongoing already.
If this is not approved tonight, do you have the money to do those projects that are on your punch list under the existing funds that are in the account?
We would go back to the board and see if they wanted to use some of the set-aside money to do those projects.
I'm just concerned about stockpiling here.
Let's focus on the 1.6 million set aside for the COVID expenses. What's the plan for that money
The plan is to keep it in case we need it.
to be? I'm just concerned about you already have 2.7 million in there, so I'm just concerned about the precedent of now setting aside additional money in there that you don't intend to spend. And
I think it would have been helpful if we saw the list beforehand of what you're planning on spending the money on, but I think what I'm hearing now is that you're not planning on spending it. Is that correct? Or so I guess then my question is, if you did not get this money, how would you go about funding those items? Would you budget for them again next year, or would you take it from the 2.7 that's already sitting there?
I think we'd have to go back to the Board of Ed to decide that. I don't believe we would make that decision.
But I want the folks to understand, and all of us up here to understand, that this could be a $10 million account someday.
I, too, have concerns. My discussion with Dr. Menzo at the time, and he agreed that it was a likelihood or a possibility was that that COVID money would be coming in from the federal government, blah, 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 blah. And sure enough, that's what happened, and there ended up being a large surplus. So I went into this meeting last year thinking like, all right, I'm not giving the money back. Dr. Menzo was very stressed, worried about cash flow issues. I figured it's fine. So I supported depositing that money. So here we are, still with that money set aside, which I guess is great. I floated it less publicly this last time. I just have a problem increasing a surplusing budget, that we can give you more money during the year if there ends up being a problem with COVID expenses. So where I sit right now, my recommendation or my thoughts are that I would not be supportive of this. I would recommend using the 1.6 that you have set aside for COVID, and if real COVID expenses come later on, we can address them. But as it stands right now, almost $1 million, I would be more comfortable letting it go this time.
Every time we start talking budgets and we start questioning, well, wait a minute, what are you going to spend that money on? I mean, explain to me that's when you've gone too far. When you talk about where the money's going specifically, you're getting out of your lane. It's not your job. Now, they tell us where it's all going, not so that we could say, I approve. They tell us where it's going so that we can say, thank you, it's not going to the casino. No one is taking surplus money and deciding to do crazy new things.
I don't think we're nitpicking if you come before us looking to keep over $900,000 to find out what you're going to spend the money on. It's an opportunity that we have to get into these weeds, and I don't think you were offended by any of our questions. So, thank you.
So I went to Holy Cross. It's a Jesuit college, and they say one of the hallmarks of a Jesuit education is you can argue both sides of an issue and nobody knows where you actually stand. So I'm going to argue both sides of this issue because I'm not really sure where I stand. I'm listening to everybody budget either, but the Board of Ed is the leanest budget. I challenge people to look at your budget by object code and tell me where you would cut. On the other hand, you guys are rolling in money, not just this money, but you get CRRA money from the mayor. You've gotten bonding from the mayor on capital projects. I think Mr. Bose had told me it was up to like $11 or $12 million over the course of the last 7 or 8 years.
And this is your money, and on some level, you know, Mr. Testa said it best. We trust you
Thank you.
and the Board of Ed to know how to spend this money.
So Councilman Laffin was talking about the money stockpile, and I think for me, that's sort of my greatest concern, because I think the issue for me is there has to be a ceiling to the amount of money that we could expect the Board of Ed to have, you know, in a potential you know, rainy day fund. So I'm not sure what that amount is, but 2.7 million seems like you're getting towards the ceiling of that.
All due respect, it's not your money, it's the taxpayers' money, right? Trust but verify, and I do have a level of trust, but I just don't write checks without having some exchange, so.
So moved by Councilor Shortell, seconded by Councilor Marone. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein,
No.
Laffin,
Not this time, no.
Marone,
Yes.
Morgenstein,
Yes.
Shortell,
Yes.
Tata,
No.
Testa,
Yes.
Zandri,
No.
and Chairman Cervoni.
I vote no.
Back in. Jason, we just saw the various arguments. There were some cogent arguments by Vinny Testa, who, of course, is an employee of the Board of Ed. His boss is sitting there at the table, you know, asking for this money as an employee of the school system. Danielle Belizzi is his boss. So I would expect Vinny to be a very strong advocate for kind of whatever the Board of Ed wanted. But what about his argument? Why doesn't that make sense? He says, we trust the board. We don't need to get into the weeds on what they're doing with the money. We trust them, and if they ask for money, we should give it to them.
Well, I view my job as a town councilor to question anything I feel is appropriate to question of any of the departments. If we gave money to Public Works and they bought a lot of materials for the roads for the winter and bought in twice the amount that they ever would normally buy, I would ask them why they did that. And if they could make the argument that they got a better rate, they got a better price, they have the ability to store it over the summer, then I might agree with their decision if they in the long run got us savings per unit, per ton, whatever it might be. But I have a right and I have a responsibility as a town councilor with the taxpayers' money to ask. I'm not micromanaging anybody. The departments get their money, they spend it as they see fit. At budget time, we massage the numbers a little bit as they come down from the mayor, and we make decisions based on that. But during the budget process, we ask all of the different departments, and I feel that's our responsibility. No differently than at this meeting when they said, we'd like to roll these unspent funds over. I feel like we've got the imperative to ask why. If they've already got a savings account, why do they need more? I think it was totally appropriate to ask.
Yeah, I agree with you. And let's not forget the test of when this money should be transferred from the general fund to the Board of Ed 2% fund. And that is in the sound discretion of the council. So the council has to weigh all factors. Do they have enough money now? Are they going to be overfunded? Is the 2% fund going to be a money sponge and as you suggested earlier, to sort of grow and grow and not be used for the, for urgent needs, and in deciding whether or not the town should keep the money or pass it over the 2% fund, the competing interests of the taxpayers and the Board of Ed has to be weighed and balanced, as you indicated. In some years, yeah, maybe, depending on the circumstances, but in other years, maybe not. Maybe don't give it over to the Board of Ed. Gina Morgenstein had a very brief comment, and she approved wholeheartedly of what Vinnie Testa said, but then said to the superintendent and the business manager, "This is your money, and we trust you." That indicated to me that she was either using a rhetorical device, "This is your money." She didn't really mean it with serious intent, or she didn't understand the issues. Your thoughts on what I just said, or maybe you want me to clarify.
Yeah, could you clarify it just a little bit more where you're going with that?
It's not their money. Basically, it's not their money. It's the town's money. It's in the general fund. It stays in the general fund. If it's not spent, it still stays in the general fund until the council decides it doesn't need to stay in the general fund, and it can go over to the Board of Ed. But to characterize this $970,000 as the board's money, it's just untrue. It's inaccurate. It puts it all in a false light. I don't quite know where she's coming from, as they say, unless she doesn't understand the issues or does understand the issues and is trying to advocate, strongly to have the Board of Ed get it and say, well, it's the board's money. It's absolutely not so. So your thoughts on?
Yeah. So if you look at where I think she might have been looking, I think her view may be skewed. It was originally budgeted to the Board of Ed. It went unspent and it rolls back to the general fund, where then we could say, again, at our discretion, sure, let's, it's almost like an appropriation in force of a view. We'll let you guys roll it over into your little 2% account instead of letting it pile up in the general fund. I've always been critical of the general fund. I think it's too large. I do not suggest we just spend it down, but we certainly could put it to more municipal and general government use on a year-by-year basis to keep it from growing any larger. So I'm of the same mindset here with this number. We've gotten to a point with the amount they've got in this rollover fund where I think they should start to put it to some use. And again, to your point, it's taxpayer money. We taxed all of the residents and businesses of this town to build up a fund of money, which then we put out to all the different departments in town, including the Board of Education, which is 68% of the entire budget. When that money comes back, if we can put it in the general fund balance and use it to keep tax increases down or eliminate them, maybe we should. Or if the Board of Ed is in a position where they've got a lot of strategic need for it, then we let them use it. But we have to make a decision on a year-by-year basis. And this year, I couldn't do it.
So what did not come up in the presentation until a member of the public asked the question, the Board of Ed, in addition to its 2% fund and in addition to its budget amount, has $4.5 million in ARPA funds, federal COVID relief money spread over 2 years that is sitting somewhere. Well, it's sitting in the town's bank account. So add $4.5 million for COVID related expenses, which suggests to me that to the extent that the Board of Ed is holding back or reserving, I forgot the exact number, but a lot of money for COVID, they don't need it. They haven't needed it. And that was Tom Laffin's very cogent point. But I was somewhat disappointed that the Board of Ed representatives, school district representatives, didn't bring up that $4.5 million and explain the interplay between the $4.5 million and town's money that they have in their 2% fund, because it seems like they are stockpiling at this point. Your thoughts on that, and then.
And I think that's an important point to make, and to clarify that the 4.5 million in ARPA funds, unless I'm mistaken, does not include the 13 million that the town is getting separately. So the town is getting like 13 million, and the Board of Education specific is getting 4.5 4 point something million, 4.5 separate, entirely separate from the municipal side. So I think the reason it didn't get brought up, whether consciously or unconsciously, because I don't like to judge anybody, it slipped my mind to even ask about it. So I'm glad that the member of the public brought it up. But I think it ruins their argument for why they need another 969, and they didn't want to bring it up. If you bring up the fact that, you know, we're stockpiling 1.5 in case we need it for COVID use, oh, and by the way, we've also got 4.5 over here, then you ruin your argument for the 969. And I think that's why it came up like that.
One of the counselors, and I believe it was Christina Tata, went into a reason why the town should keep the 970,000 rather than putting over the Board of Ed. And that argument was that this money could be used for tax relief, not a refund check. We're not talking about that. But to the extent that the council perceives as more money in the general fund, maybe more than is needed, that could be reflected in tax relief come this May. So it's not a matter of adding money to the town's rainy day fund that would just be stockpiled there. Not necessarily. It could show up as a decrease in the mill rate.
Right, and I think that's important to remember, because I think another counselor, I don't remember who, brought up that point. What are we going to do, start writing checks? I would never advocate for writing checks. First off, if we actually went and gave an actual refund out, we'd be spending all kinds of money on postage that would be a complete waste. So to me, exactly to your point, if I was serving over the next two budgets, that's what I would be doing. Look, I know there's more money. We can put more of the general fund balance into use, which would keep that mill rate increase either flat or as much downward pressure as possible. That's what we did, the town council did for the past two budgets. The only reason somebody's payment might have changed this past year was revaluation of their property and the value of their property that was taxed. Otherwise, we've held it flat for 2 years. And that was the council over the mayor, and we had to come up with 7 votes to do it.
Yeah, I want to close on some brief commentary on Vinnie Cervone's commentary. Vinnie Cervone, chairman of the town council, made a comment that when the Board of Ed or really any department comes to them looking for money in the order of magnitude of 970,000, it's entirely appropriate to begin to ask questions about why you need it, why you haven't spent what you have, where's the money going, how important are the expenditures, how urgent is it? It's very appropriate to do that, and that's the exact kind of inquiry that Vinnie Testa objected to. So I thought Vinnie Cervone's comments were very timely and right on point. Before we wrap up, any thoughts on my comments, and then we'll give it a close.
I think it's a very difficult thing for any counselor to do. We sit there and we understand how we're impacting the education budget by doing something like this. And I don't think anybody took it very lightly. Again, Tom Laughlin as an example, he said this time no. I have supported it in the past, and this time for me it was no. And I think in future years it would be yes, either by me or anybody else. It all depends on the real need. And I think some of us question the real need this time.
And so the vote was close, 5-4. 5 councils said, no, we're not going to transfer it over to the 2% fund this year. Let's wrap it up and make that the final word. Jason, thanks for coming on the show. Good luck to whatever happens to you down the line. Hope to see you on the Citizen Mike show again, and looking forward to see you on the ballot in 2023.
More than happy to come back. Just send me the invite. I'll be here.
Okay, will do. And thanks everyone for watching the Citizen Mike show. We appreciate it. WPAA puts us up on their channel on weekday nights at 9 p.m. So as we have said for more than 11 years, if it's night at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everybody. Good night, Jason. Thanks.
Good night, Mike.